In this video, we're going to look at adjectives, adverbs, and prepositions. So let's start with adjectives. Adjectives are really simple. They indicate properties of nouns. So for instance, in happy man, we have happy, which is an adjective, which is modifying the man. So what kind of man is he? Well, he's a happy one. Or dangerous cliff. Well, it modifies cliff. So dangerous is an adjective modifying cliff. What type of cliff it is? Or is it? Well, it's a dangerous cliff. We also have some other types of adjectives which kind of look like verbs in a sense. So it was good. So in this case, good is modifying whatever it was, but it is a predicative adjective, which means that it looks as if it's a predicate, so was good. Okay, we'll just distinguish these properties in just a second. So the first one that we saw was attributive. So they directly modify a noun. So something like the red car. In Greek, we see apiros auto, which means the red car. So red is modifying a car, and red comes right before it. Please excuse my pronunciation of Greek. There's a lot of languages I cannot pronounce. I'm trying my best. Okay, so the second one is Breton. Okay, so instead of saying a large man, they just say a man large. But this large, again, is just modifying the man. It just happens to come after the noun. So we saw this discrepancy in English and Spanish in the first video as well, where English would say the beautiful waterfall and Spanish would say the waterfall beautiful. Okay, so these are attributive, which means they're going to come directly before or directly after the noun. Now, we also have these predicative adjectives, so like it was good. We also have other patterns, such as he felt or he seemed. So he seemed happy, he felt sad, he felt embarrassed. These are adjectives, but they're predicative because they take a form of a predicate. Okay, here's an example of Malay. So Ali angry. Well, it looks like it's attributive because the adjective is coming right after Ali, right? Well, it turns out in Malay, they do not have these copula verbs for is. So this Ali is angry, they don't have a word for is. So when they have the adjective right after, it takes a predicative form. Okay? So this is one of those examples where, it looks like it's attributive, it's actually predicative, and how can we tell? How can we tell that this is predicative with just this example sentence? Well, typically you'd be given other sentences as well, so you might be given something like a dog mean. So in this case, a dog mean, and then you take a look at your translation. So if the translation was just a mean dog, then you'd say, oh, it's attributive. So this is an attributive reading. But if you have another sentence like a dog is mean, and this is your translation, then in this case, it would be predicative. Predicative, yes, predicative. Okay, so sometimes we have to rely on the translation a little bit to understand whether it's attributive or predicative, but they both have the same function. They modify the verbs. Okay, some adjectives can be both. So for instance, the happy elephant, in this case, happy is modifying elephant, and it's directly before. In other cases, it might be predicative. So he seemed happy, where happy is modifying he, but it's in this predicate. Okay, so what about an example that doesn't work? Like, I could say, oh, the mere linguist wrote a paper, and that's not very nice to say, oh, the mere linguist, generally. But you can't say something like, the linguist was mere. Like that doesn't make any sense, right? So mere is one of those adjectives that can only be attributive, and it cannot be predicative. Okay? So that's one of those examples where not all adjectives can be both attributive and predicative. Okay. We also have intensifiers. Intensifiers, which for now we'll label as degree or ins. Later we may revise this, but these are words that essentially tell you how adjective something is. So too depressed, very excited, quite happy, less satisfying, full, enough. So enough is one of those weird cases where the intensifier comes after the adjective. It's one of the very few in English. Typically they come right before. So rather, disappointed, again rather, is modifying how disappointed. Less, well, how satisfying? Oh, it's less satisfying. How happy? Quite happy. Okay, so these are intensifiers. There's really not too much to say about them. There's only a handful of these in English, so you'll typically just recognize them based on how they look. We do also have comparatives and superlatives. So, comparative. Here's a sentence where the comparative is part of the morphology. So he is smarter than me. So this ER is a comparative suffix that attaches to adjectives. Okay, but then we also have just the intensifier. So the comparative intensifier. That game is more fun than this one. So this comparative can take the form of a morphology or it can take the form of a word. So you could say something like, oh, that game is harder than I expected, or that game is more hard than I expected. So same meaning, just different form of the comparative. The same thing is true for the superlative. So he is the smartest. So this is the est superlative suffix that attaches to adjectives. And we also have that game is the most fun. So this most can also be our superlative intensifier. Okay? Yeah, so that's the difference between comparative and superlative, and those attach to adjectives. Okay, let's take a look at adverbs. Nothing too special to say about adverbs. They modify verbs. So usually in English, we have this ly suffix on adverbs, and we can make an adverb by taking an adjective and attaching ly to it. So she quietly ate the meal. So the question is, how did she eat the meal? Well, she did it quietly. So we have quietly modifying the verb. Or he suddenly fell asleep. So, oh, he fell asleep. How did he fall asleep? Oh, suddenly. He just suddenly fell asleep. Okay. I quickly finished my homework. Oh, how did you finish? Oh, you finished quickly. I slowly finished my homework. I finished my homework suddenly. I finished my homework devastatingly. It doesn't quite make any sense, but it is an adverb. Okay, so yeah, these are adverbs. They will usually almost always modify verbs. And you will have to draw some trees eventually when we get to tree drawing with adverbs. And by then, hopefully, they'll be pretty easy to identify. Okay, the last thing that's really important are prepositions. And typically, we know what prepositions are intuitively, generally, but it is good just to point them out and make sure that we absolutely know what a preposition is. So prepositions mark locative or temporal information. So where or when. Okay, so towards the entrance. This is a preposition that tells us in what direction are we going to the entrance, or towards, or where is it in relation to the entrance. Here it is, towards it. The knife on the plate. So the question is, where is the knife? Where is the location of the knife? Oh, it's on the plate. Or the story about overcoming a challenge. Okay, so this isn't really locative or temporal, so it's not, okay, where is the location of the story, or when in time is the story. This is like, what's the story about? What's the information inside the story? Well, the story is about overcoming a challenge. So these are all prepositions. Okay? We can think of these as predicates in some sense, which if you take a semantics course, you'll deal with. Again, I'll cover it in syntax when it becomes important, but we can again think of on, even though it's not a verb. We can think of it as on xy, so x is on y, towards, so we can think of towards as being towards something, about Again, you can take about, and you can say, well, X is about Y, so you can kind of think of these as predicates, if that helps. But for this course, we won't need these logical representations. Okay, so we have prepositions. There are also postpositions in languages. And what's the difference between a preposition and a postposition? It's where the preposition, or it's where that position, in quotes, is. So for Tokyo from come, so this is come from Tokyo. But we see here that when we say this from Tokyo as a grouping, this from is coming after the noun. Okay? Or in that school, so we have that school, but our preposition in comes after, so it's a postposition. I'm always kind of at a loss of what to call it when I explain, oh, it's a preposition that comes after, but that's just a postposition. So really, whether it's a preposition or postposition just stems from where in the word order or where in the constituent it appears. In this case, in 5, it occurs after the noun phrase, so it is a postposition. Well, if we take a look at the previous sentence, towards the entrance or on the plate or about overcoming a challenge, we see that it occurs at the beginning of our constituent. We'll talk about constituents next video. Okay, so here's an exercise where we're just going to label a bunch of words, whether they're a noun, verb, adjective, adverb, intensifier, determiner, or a preposition. So pause the video or do it in your head. And here are the answers. So the is a determiner. So determiners go with nouns. We have the old man. So old describes the man. So old is going to be an adjective. And man is a noun. So we can think of this as like a group. So the old man. Determiners go with nouns and adjective modify nouns. So these are like a cluster. Okay. Happily. Well, happily has an ly, so I think it's an adverb right now, but let's take a look at the next word, left. Happily left. Well, this left is a verb. So happily left, well, this is modifying how the old man is leaving. So, or how the old man left. Okay, happily. So happily here is going to be an adverb because it modifies the verb. So the old man happily left his very old home. So his is going to be a determiner for now. And why is it a determiner? Well, his very old home. So home is a noun. Old is an adjective since it modifies the noun. And very is an intensifier that tells us how old it is. So we can think of this very old as being a group together. And this is modifying the home. And then his, which is our determiner that goes with home. So this is kind of our justification for why his is a determiner and not a noun. But when we get to possessive structure, we'll see a little bit more about why it has to be a determiner and why it can't be a noun. Okay, so the old man happily left his very old home in Chicago this morning. Well, we saw in just before, so this is a preposition, P. Chicago. Okay, so Chicago is a city name. It is a proper name. But all proper names are just nouns, so we'll label it as a noun. This morning, this is a determiner. More specifically, it's a demonstrative, but we just call them determiners. We don't have to be that specific. And finally, morning, well, this morning is a noun. It is an abstract noun, but it is a noun nonetheless. So the old man happily left his very old home in Chicago this morning. So, determiner, adjective, noun, adverb, verb, determiner, intensifier, adjective, noun, preposition, noun, determiner, noun. It doesn't quite have the same ring to it when you just read off the labels, does it? But hopefully this exercise was a little bit to get you going with labeling words. I mean, you have sentences all around you. You can even go look at the comments at some people saying obscene things, and you can label those words too. Or you can get sentences from the internet. Say, hey, in this case, what would this be? And you can ask those questions in the comments. So if you have those questions, please ask them, and I'll do my best to answer them.